When we left off in the last video, we had drawn out all the geometry that I believe is going to be needed for doing the embosses on this piece. And now we're ready to do a little bit of preliminary talk and then start in with the embossing. One of the first things I want to talk about is a few of the conventions that I'm going to be using on this piece. I made a decision when I started doing the embossing that the frame, if you drilled a hole straight through right here, or you push one of these pins out actually, and measured side to side, would be 5/8 of an inch. This is roughly what the originals are. It's not exactly, but it's close. The reason I want to know that is there are a lot of flat planes in here. The top of the grip, this upper piece of the back strap, the side of the trigger plate here, side of the frame, little piece on the barrel lug here, and then this flat on the barrel. I'm going to make all of those coplanar. That gives me a good reference point for basically everything. The trigger and the hammer, I'm going to make both of those. Essentially, I'm going to raise them up 1/8 of an inch. They'll be, if it were an actual piece, 1/4 inch wide. A little bit wider on the trigger guard. You see where I'm headed with all this. It's important to have this information down and to stick to it, or you're going to wind up with little ledges and things that just need to be taken care of all over the place. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot to talk about. One thing that I did do is you see that the grip here is now not one big spline, it's now 3 smaller splines. Two things to say about that. One is I realized that I'm going to make a 2 rail sweep from right here down to the bottom, and 1 rail from here down to the bottom. Well, I needed to be able to break that. Another is that I just found out that you can break a spline. When I went to do that, you can drag a line across the spline and use the break mini tool, and it doesn't explode the line. Or it doesn't explode the spline, I should say. So one of my premises with splines, I could have used them in more places, is what I'm getting at. It doesn't kill you to have to cut across a spline. If you do it right, then Bobcat's smart enough to handle that properly. So you learn something new every day. Alright, another thing that I did, let me back off a little here so you can see it, is I have already gone in and drawn the cross sections that I'll be using for a lot of these sweeps. This is the 3 cross sections for the wooden grip. At the bottom, it's flared out a little bit, and it's rounded in the center, and up at the top, how well you can see this. Yeah, you can pretty well see it. Kind of flattens out to a rectangular shape, just a little bit of a radius on the corners. So the original one was I just had this shape and this one, and it was a little bit too square at the top, so I added a 3rd one. So having said all that, let's go ahead and dive in and start doing some embossing. First thing we'll want to do is create our stock. This piece, 11.5 by 5 inches, will do well. I'm going to start off with a resolution of 200. Resolution relates to how many triangles per inch. BobArt embosses are working with meshes, which is to say triangles and low number n-gons, rhomboids, low side number polyhedrons. Mostly it's triangles. Pretty much everything can be resolved to triangles, and that's the basic stance of the algorithm is to do that. Alright, we'll pick a color, go with a nice reddish brown, and believe we're ready to, oh, my bad. I was actually thinking that I was already in the 2 rail sweep. What I actually wanted to do was pick a nice neutral backdrop that doesn't burn my eyes the way that reddish brown did. We'll use that for the grip. Alright, so now to start off with, we'll do the grip. I'm going to pick emboss 2 rail sweep, and first thing I'll do is pick the color that I want to use. I'll pick that. It's a little bit less of a harsh brown. The second thing I want to do is name this. If you don't get in the habit, especially with a piece like this, it's going to have 30 or 40 embossings on it. If you don't get in the habit of naming them, you're going to be digging through a lot of stuff trying to figure out which one is the one you're looking for. Really, it's greatly to your advantage to name them up front. If you don't, you'll wind up going back in and naming them. I can almost guarantee you. The differences between the transition types are pretty minor, and for the most part, a local smooth works fine. Sync rail nodes, there's some good tutorials on this in the help section. Sync rail nodes, if I were doing a fancy picture frame, say, that had the undulating contour on the inside, if your geometry is not very well synchronized between the inside rail and the outside rail, then when you get to a corner it doesn't look right. Well, sync rail nodes, that's what that's about. 3D rails is when you're using geometry that is not in the plane here. Well, everything I've got's in the plane, so I don't have to worry about really either one of those anywhere on this one. Your basic additive type emboss, and I don't need a base height on this one, so everything's okay. One thing I do need to do is add 2 more cross sections, which is a matter of right clicking and clicking on add new cross section and doing it again so that I have 3. So now I'll define my rails. Go to rail 1, reselect, and you're essentially defining a what are they called, a contour here. I want the contour origin to be up here at the top on this rail and over right here on this rail. Consequently, if you've read any of Soren's videos, he teaches you how to draw contours so that they wind up in the right direction. But you want to, basically, your arrow follows your cursor. So if you put your cursor over on this side of the line, the arrow, when it comes into play here, will be here pointed in that direction. I've got some very small segments here and here where I joined the splines on, so it really behooves you to remember when you do bad things like that, like I did, so that you know to zoom in and not shoot yourself in the foot. So there we go, starts there, ends there. Click OK, and there's that arrow I was talking about. And I want that one to be on the same side as this one. And if you do get it wrong in the 2-rail sweep, you can right click on your rail and you have the option to reverse direction. But when you have multiple lines, it's just a good idea to get in the habit of working in that way. So we go to our second rail, reselect. There's my little piece of geometry I needed to get right. There. Click OK. And you see that it is also at the top, pointing toward the downward side. Alright, the sweep is going from the top down, so my first cross section needs to be this little guy right here. Reselect. I don't need the bottom of this. Just like in these, I don't need the little bounding rectangle. I drew a rectangle and then just pulled one side of it up to make these. That gave me a way to basically gauge my height and know that I was a little bit flared out on the butt, not quite as much there, that I was the right, the appropriate width, and that this is kind of the baseline flat that I wanted to aim for. Just a method of doing that without hassling it too much. So I reselect, and on this one you can get started with it, hold down shift and go to the other side, click. Then when you click OK, you notice on this first segment I clicked over here, so it pointed in that direction. Then on this one I got down here, held shift, clicked on it to say, hey, this is the end at the end of this segment. And that's the way you define those when you've got multiple segments, and especially when you've got a piece of geometry that's joined up to things that you don't need. So that's the first one. We select on the second one, and on this you can just click on this, hit OK, and it gets to pick its own direction. It doesn't matter so much with these guys, but I'm in the habit of lining things up, so I'm going to reverse direction on that so that everybody is basically in agreement. Go to the last one, reselect, we'll grab it, okay. Alright, and it's on the right side, or the side that I want it to be on. I don't know that it really matters so much. So I'm going to do a regenerate, and there's my grip. Down here, alright, you can see a bit of a line there. I'm not worried about that because I'm going to come back in doing some sculpting passes that'll let me just smooth that right out. Overall, that grip is what I had in mind. So we're going to drive on to the next emboss. Get up to a top view here. And I'm going to get rid of that geometry because I'm done with it and I don't want it cluttering anything. Next, I'm going to do some of my just plainer slab pieces that I was talking about just a moment ago. We'll go with a regular emboss. And another thing that I'm going to do convention wise here is I'm going to choose a particular shade of blue, and that's going to be the blued parts of this, the barrel, the pins, the parts that are very dark blue. Other parts of this pistol are case hardened, and I'm just going to pick a lighter blue for that. For the brass trigger guard, I'm going to pick just a yellow, and that's really all the colors that I'm going to have besides the wood on the grip. So what I'm going to be doing now is some case hardened stuff, so I'll pick that one, and I will go with a line. I get to pick my height here, and again, just a moment ago I said that I was going to make all these parts basically 3/16, 0.325, or excuse me, 3/8, not 3/16. And I'm going to make the angle 90. So this is just going to be a part rising straight up into the air, and that's all okay. So now I get to pick the geometry. Geometry reselect. Oh, one of the things that I'm going to do is blank the emboss so I can see my geometry. So we'll do this one right here. I see there's a little fillet in there. It's those little tiny pieces of geometry that'll bite you if you don't remember you did them. And I'm really bad about forgetting that. So I've got that bounded. Click OK. Okay, it took. Now we can unblank, regenerate. And that's a little bit tall. But I'm not going to worry about it. It's not too much. It's down in the fit and finish area. If I want to change that, what I'll do is lengthen the legs on this piece right here, which I can do that almost any time. Might as well do it now. Alright, go into CAD. I want to slide that the normal. That should be enough. Now going back to BobArt to my rail sweep. My first piece of cross-sectional geometry, you can see doesn't quite go to the floor now. So what I'll do is remove it, reselect it, do not hold shift on the first one lest you get things you don't want. There, and click OK. Now when I regenerate this, I should have a little bit more of a match there. Do that. Yeah, that's close enough that I can take that out with some sculpting, so I'm not going to worry about that anymore. Go to top. And going to edit that and put in backstrap, because that part is the top of the backstrap that goes down the back of the grip. Next we'll do the side of the receiver, or the frame I should say. We'll do same thing, an emboss regular, take a line, same height, go with 90 degrees, pick a color, and that should do that. Gonna blank this so I can see my geometry and select it. Got a tiny fillet piece there. Now here, if you'll recall, this line right here is going to be a hidden part of this part above. So this section right here is actually going to be the top of the embossment I'm doing now. Okay, that's everything. Click OK. Unblank. And regenerate. Alright, looking good. Blank that again. Going to edit that and put in a name. Call it frame side. Now we're going to do the trigger plate next. And this again is a regular emboss line. Again 3/8, again 90 degrees. This part is brass, so I'm going to pick a bright yellow. Additive, okay, that should be fine. Reselect the geometry. It's actually one piece, but there's considerable relief. You get there. You can see that the actual trigger guard is cut in pretty far from the trigger plate. So I'm going to do them separately. I'll do the trigger plate in one emboss, which I'm doing now, and the trigger guard is a separate one. So reselect and just start our way around. Again, just following along as we do our contours. I don't remember whether there's anything small left in there or not. There is, but it's not part of this one. Alright, I'm going to rename that trigger plate. Alright, so I'm getting a little bit of crossover there, and I can get rid of that bleed over by going back in here and editing this to not be a line. So instead I'm going to go with a convex ellipse, which at first glance seems like exactly the wrong way to do it, but you can make this thing high and not laid out long like that. So my major axis, I want 0.325. Yeah, I got an extra decimal in there. And on the minor axis, I'm going to go with 15 thousandths. So taking that and regenerating it, there we go. You've got a very slight break there. If you look down, you can see it, but it's not going to matter. It's small enough that the tool that you use is not going to get in there most likely, and if it does, that's fine. It would just be a little tiny shadow reveal. Alright, so next the trigger guard itself, and I'm going to make that one a regular. Once again, I'm going to use the convex ellipse. I'm going to make this one, say, 0.23 with let's give it 1/100, just barely break the edge. Give it the same yellow color. Name it trigger guard. And I don't have the geometry selected yet, so it didn't do anything when I regenerated. Now I can select the geometry. You can see here that I did not, as I thought I was going to do, go back and do the trigger guard as splines. I just kept the geometry from the initial vectorization and tweaked it slightly. It was fine as it was. Okay, that's got those lined out. Click OK. Unblank and regenerate and see what we got. Okay, that looks relatively good. Now the trigger and hammer, I'll do those as one emboss just because they're identical essentially as far as the embossment goes. Go with well, first I'm going to blank it. I'll go with a regular emboss. In those cases we will go with a line. We'll go with a 1/8. Is that right? Go with 0.15. 90 degrees. They're a little bit darker, so I'm going to take a slightly darker color for those. It'll barely be noticeable, but it'll make that little bit of difference. Name it. Okay. And then select the geometry. Okay, the hammer is 2 splines and then 2 small pieces of, well, it's actually several more small pieces of geometry, but the splines take care of a lot of it. There. And that is those. Click OK. Unblank and regenerate. And from our top view, we're looking pretty good. Okay, see that I've burned about 20 minutes on this. I'm going to do one more quick emboss, and then I'm going to break this off for the next video. So first thing I'm going to do is blank this, and then I'm going to show why I'm going to do a lot of 2-rail sweeps using that cross section right there. I'm going to do the cylinder next. So we go to a 2-rail sweep for this one. Going to pick a dark blue color for this because it is one of the blued components. OK. Name it cylinder. And that's all we are going to need. So I only need one cross section for this, and it's going to start here, and it's going to go here, neck down, move on back, do a radius, and all of this on a cylindrical piece of stock. The reason being it resizes according to the width of the 2 rails. So when I do the barrel, I'll use this same semicircular, well, it's half of a circle. I'll also use it for this this little rod here, this rod here, there. There's a tapered piece there that's the rear of the barrel, a little cylinder in there. All of them will be the same one, regardless of size. It'll size itself to the width of the rails that I use. So we're going to define those rails. And just move front to back. And stop when we hit the end of the cylinder. Get back to a top view. Alright, that's got the top one defined. Now we'll move to the bottom rail. It has a few less segments to worry about in it. We don't really have to worry about that though, because this is all going to key off just the width of the rails, and they're parallel, or very close to parallel all the way throughout. So I want to make sure, yep, both of those start at the front, go toward the rear. So we pick our cross-section geometry, select it, and we can unblank and regenerate. And there is the cylinder sitting there primed and ready to go. It is going to have a few things cut into it, some slots here, slots more toward the rear of it, and it's going to have some small raised embosses in there. But the length of this video now is such that I'm going to stop where I'm at, and I'm going to break that off for the next video. And we'll see you then.